So the Supreme Court recently granted review to the next big Second Amendment case, and it once again is going to deal with state concealed carry restrictions and the laws that were passed in direct defiance to what the Supreme Court said recently in their Bruin ruling. This is great news, but we need to talk about what is now happening in direct response to the Supreme Court granting review to this case. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to ask you guys for a favor. If you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to subscribe to the channel. Also, double check to make sure YouTube is not unsubscribed you, because they love to do that, especially on two-way channels. And also, it'd be great to try to reach 900,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Kind of far off, but it would be cool to try to do that. Now, also, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to protecting yourself after a self-defense incident, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, so they can help you in all the self-defense situations that maybe you would find yourself in. And also right now, they're always expanding their benefits. They've added a lot to their benefits and more is coming. So if you're interested in the best self-defense protection, in my opinion, check out AOR using the links down below. And if you sign up using my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $50 off of your individual sign-up plan or $25 off of a family plan. So as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a very significant thing that is now developed at the Supreme Court level. The Supreme Court has recently granted review to the next big Second Amendment case, and once again, it deals with concealed carry restrictions in a case called Woolford versus Lopez. This is huge for everyone in states like New York, California, Hawaii, and others who are currently living under laws which were passed in direct response to Bruin, and these all involve concealed carry restrictions. The Hawaii Woolford case sought emergency Supreme Court intervention in this case, and surprisingly, the Supreme Court did grant review to this case. This challenge revolves around a preliminary injunction and the Ninth Circuit finding that states could put in place these catch-all public property bans, also sometimes referred to as vampire rules, and they said that it was permissible under the Second Amendment, and that is now up for review in the Supreme Court. And this grant of review by the Supreme Court is already impacting some of these other concealed carry Bruin defines cases that deal with concealed carry restrictions. And all of these are now going to impact other jurisdictions like California, New York, and New Jersey. Now, if you're not aware, this case is a challenge to Hawaii's new laws on concealed carry, which they passed in direct response to the Bruin ruling. This law, like other ones in other states like California, tried to add more restrictions to concealed carry and create a default rule where individuals can carry firearms at private properties that are open to the public. So essentially just think of any business that's open to the public. You could only go into those locations if the owner either gave you express permission through something like a sign or maybe even verbal consent in the state of Hawaii. Now, that was challenged by the plaintiffs here in a federal district court in Hawaii, and on review, a lower court issued a temporary restraining order, which was then later converted to a preliminary injunction. However, of course, the state of Hawaii did not like that, so then they appealed up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit reviewed Hawaii's concealed carry restrictions along with the California's, which in that lawsuit, I'm also a plaintiff in. And so the Ninth Circuit reviewed both of those cases, and surprisingly, the Ninth Circuit upheld Hawaii's concealed carry catch-all bans, but then also said at the same time California's was invalid and violated the Second Amendment. Now, the main kind of crux of why they upheld Hawaii's was they said Hawaii's operated in a way that was a little bit more permissive. The businesses there could either post a sign giving you permission to go into those locations, or they can give you verbal consent, or you could get some other consent from the property owner. So because of that, the Ninth Circuit upheld the law. And that has now led this case to seek emergency Supreme Court intervention, which was granted now by the Supreme Court. Like I mentioned, we also saw the United States government jump in support of the plaintiffs here against Hawaii's catch-all property bans, and they pushed the Supreme Court to grant review to this case because they said nothing else needed to be developed at the lower court level, that there did not necessarily need to be more evidence or merits arguments at the lower court level, and even the state of Hawaii conceded that at the Ninth Circuit level, and that really kind of caught the state of Hawaii here in a trap and ultimately probably led the Supreme Court to granting review to this case. They pointed out that Hawaii at the Ninth Circuit level argued that there was nothing else for the lower court to develop at the trial court level and no further evidence was needed. And they also pointed to statements made by Hawaii's representative at the Ninth Circuit level where the attorney for Hawaii stated expressly that they just think that this is a Second Amendment legal question, nothing else needs to be developed, and that this can move forward at the Ninth Circuit level. But then when this got to the Supreme Court, suddenly Hawaii kind of changed their tune, was saying, no, you need to kick this back down. This needs further development. There's no circuit split. Avoid the Supreme Court. But ultimately, the plaintiffs here and the United States government were saying, well, you contradicted what you said at the Ninth Circuit level, and therefore, we kind of have to take what you said as fact, and legally, you have to take what they said as fact because they conceded that at the Ninth Circuit level, and that has now led the Supreme Court to grant review to this case. And last Monday, the Supreme Court, after conference, granted review to this case, and in the grant of the cert, it simply stated that petition is granted limited to question 1 presented by the petition. So the question is, what is the Supreme Court granting review to? Well, it's going to be question 1 that was in the petition, and the question 1 is whether the Ninth Circuit erred in holding in direct conflict with the Second Circuit that Hawaii may presumptively prohibit the carry of handguns by licensed concealed carry permit holders on private property open to the public unless the property owner affirmatively gives express permission to the handgun carrier. That means that the Supreme Court will directly address these kind of catch-all property bans, these vampire rules, which were passed in direct response to Bruin. And it was passed in states like California, Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, and others. It is also very likely that this ruling and this decision by the Supreme Court will dig deeper into the prior Bruin analysis and decisions and outline a little bit more expressly for these lower courts how they should deal with two-way questions going forward. And maybe even we will get some positive language in this ruling that will impact other cases not dealing directly with concealed carry restrictions. Now, since the grant of review in this case, a couple of things have kind of now developed in response to the Supreme Court taking the next big two-way case. First, there have already been motions filed in some of these other cases in other federal court levels, like in California, circuit court cases in the Third Circuit and Second Circuit, where they're saying now that they want to hold these cases in response to the Supreme Court granting review to this concealed carry case. This is done essentially because it would be a little bit of a waste of time and money to continue litigation on some of these concealed carry cases, because once the Supreme Court issues the ruling in the Wolford case, all these other cases would simply have to redo all of those briefs, all of that analysis and arguments. So it's better to hold off and brief those cases after the Wolford ruling is issued by the Supreme Court. Now, the second thing that is developed, which is a little bit concerning, is we've already heard some rumblings from some of these anti-gun states, including Hawaii, that they may try to moot these catch-all property bans that they passed in these Bruin response laws. This is a strategy that has happened a couple times, especially once the Supreme Court grants review to these two-way cases. We've seen New York do this a couple times prior in some concealed carry cases as well. So we're going to be keeping our eyes on these states to see, do they attempt to skirt the impact of a Supreme Court ruling or try to get the Supreme Court to kick the case by trying to moot some of these vampire rules by removing them or modifying them. That has happened before. New York was successful prior in a case that was granted review by the Supreme Court. New York modified their concealed carry law, and that was the prior New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case. There was one case that made it to the Supreme Court prior. They granted review to it. New York modified their law, removed it, mooted the case, and then you had to have another case go to the Supreme Court after that. And essentially at that point, that's when we got the Bruin ruling that we all know. So we're going to have to keep our eyes on these states to see what they do in response to the Supreme Court taking this Wolford case. But essentially this term, the Supreme Court will once again hear a critical Second Amendment case, and they're going to rule once again on concealed carry restrictions. So with the help of the Trump administration, the Hawaii concealed carry ban case is now heading for Supreme Court review. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to subscribe to the channel. Also, you can check out my website, ARMEDSCHOLAR.com. Over there, we have a lot for you guys to check out if you're interested. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.